This is Atomic Shinobi and today I'm going to narrate what if Naruto saved Ace in a marine fort. If you enjoy this video, please like, share and subscribe to this channel. Now wasting no time, let's start the story.
History is the word that describes every event that has ever been documented in human history, including life, altering experiences and natural disasters. Anything and everything that has ushered in a new era of either peace or war, life or death. All of it has been documented in the infinite book of history. It is that book that, in a sense, defines all life since it depicts the actions that, because of the very race of man, have produced so many things. As a result of their actions, a whole millennium would either live in prosperity or be remembered for generations to come. Or it results in nothing more than war, which has led to the extinction of numerous races, or conflicts fueled by human greed that have soaked the ground in the blood and corpses of the dead. It goes without saying that throughout the ages, humanity has attempted to erase the past in order to prevent future generations from ever seeing it. They think that all of their actions are good, but in actuality, every action has a cost, so they are neither good nor bad. Sadly, people didn't see that and obstinately believed they could do things they weren't meant to do, which has led to even more death and devastation. The road to hell is paved with good intentions, as the saying goes. In this instance, the road is paved with the bones, flesh, blood, and tears of everyone who perished because of those exact intentions. Man's actions have resulted in so many deaths that some people are unable to tell the difference between humans and demons. This is the reason why another event in the book of history occurred, and this time it was documented in history. The very deities themselves had paused to observe the scene of human activity that would eventually cause the world to enter a chaotic period in which all previous actions would seem insignificant in comparison. The very gods who were watching cursed humanity's foolishness because this incident rocked the planet to its foundation, but they were powerless to stop it. That did not preclude others from doing so. This whole story started when a group of people discovered a tree. Not just any tree, though. The tree of knowledge, which has stood the test of time and been the child of the gods since it has endured so long and witnessed so much. The world began to change after this incident, and things began to fall apart in the following millennium. People's lives were flourishing peacefully when kingdoms were established because that is when the kingdom of Alubarna flourished. Along with its people, its economy grew, making it a kingdom that would be remembered for a long time and leave its mark on history forever. However, that was just the beginning, as the ugly, dark side of humanity later emerged, causing conflicts and wars against kingdoms. For centuries, countless wars had been waged. Even after the passing of the millennium, a war continued to rage. These wars, in which innocent people have lost their lives, are the result of human greed. It was only during the new century, also known as the Void Century, when human sin really came to light and God's foolishness in allowing such things to fall into the hands of humanity was exposed. For this time period, it was and will always be nothing more than pure war. This century saw human greed become so unstable that it resulted in wars between so many races and kingdoms that it was nearly impossible to calculate the subsequent death toll. For instance, during the Great War, the most notable and conspicuously obvious event of the 20th century. In fact, this war destroyed an incalculable number of civilizations and countless lives. However, that wasn't the only thing that happened after this war. At the end of the Void Century, something happened that altered the course of history. It happened when a group of 20 kings, or actually the 20 kingdoms, got together and formed an alliance that would eventually be known as the World Government in addition to the Ancient Alliance. This group fought a war and attacked a certain kingdom, the name of which has been lost to history forever. Some claim that because this kingdom posed a threat to the alliance, it destroyed them all, leaving none of them standing. Even though they believed they had won, they were gravely mistaken. This civilization saw their demise coming and produced some items before they were destroyed, which is why they are dispersed throughout the world. These items, known as poneglyphs, contained information and fragments of their kingdom's actual history. These items were also thought to contain information about another source of the world government's wrath. In other words, these ancient tablets of history contained the names and locations of the super weapons that this kingdom designed and produced. The newly established world government at the time didn't want anyone to know what these weapons were, so they outlawed any research or knowledge about them, which led to the murder of academics who were experts in the field of those particular tablets. Naturally, that wasn't all because the world government even went so far as to murder anyone who even had a connection to the poneglyphs, innocent or not. People were curious as to why the world government was so determined to keep the study of these poneglyphs under wraps. According to some, they didn't want anyone to learn anything that would challenge their authority over the territories. Others have stated that they didn't want the truth to be known because it might endanger the entire world. The government's intense efforts to conceal the actual history of the ancient kingdom and its poneglyphs were the subject of innumerable theories. However, there was actually only one real reason why the world government made such a concerted effort to conceal all of this, and that was they were, and always will be, afraid of the ancient kingdom's might and wisdom, which made them appear weak in public compared to their own. They were completely outclassed by their own technology. They were superior in every way, including fighting, knowledge, and technology. As a result of their jealousy, they banded together to remove them all in an attempt to eradicate them from the world. They killed everyone in the kingdom because they thought that was the right thing to do. However, they quickly discovered that they had overlooked something, more precisely, two things, because, as you can see, it was thought that the ancient kingdom was the one who had developed these super weapons, which had the power to destroy entire islands. Only two weapons have ever been discovered but never located, and their names will always be inscribed in the annals of history. Both of these names, Pluton and Poseidon, were thought to be the only weapons ever documented in history, but their locations have never been discovered. It is said that the world government alone has the tiniest clue, but not enough to look for them. Many people thought that the blueprints were destroyed by those who created them because they did not want the government to have them, and that the remaining ones were never constructed. However, it was false. It wasn't until the end of the Void Century that it was realized that there was more than just Pluton or Poseidon. The world government discovered something that rocked them to their foundations when they combed through the remnants of this kingdom. It was an ancient tablet that was set into the wall of the throne room of this very kingdom. They were unable to break it or remove it because it was permanently fixed in place. What was frightening, though, was that this tablet not only defined the terms for Pluton and Poseidon, but it also listed two additional names. The mere mention of these names chilled everyone in the room on the day they were read. Because these names, which would never be revealed. The final two names of the secret super weapons that were finished prior to their invasion were Oceanus and Tethys, which the world government was able to discover. Additionally, the world government was aware of the word's actual meaning on that fateful day. Fear. Because just as the Alliance's army's top general was saying those two names, a terrible tidal wave struck, killing everyone except for a few who managed to escape in their ships. The entire kingdom was erased from the map, its very existence erased from the face of the earth, by this tidal wave, a natural phenomenon. However, its mark will always remain in the boundless book of history. Because of this, the Alliance changed after the end of the Void Century, becoming the world government and the political power of the world for all time, while also destroying their past and future capabilities. With the knowledge of some of it passed down by all 20 kingdoms, the dark past of the Void Century was essentially hidden or destroyed after this turbulent time. Additionally, the world government began to grow increasingly territorial during this time by training soldiers known as Marines. That wasn't all, though, as those who disagreed with the world government soon went to sea and became known as pirates. This marks the beginning of a new era and the beginning of our story. Pirates are entering a new era, the Red Force's Grand Line. On the legendary deck of the legendary Red Force, pirate ship of the renowned red-haired pirates, the sea glistened like liquid azure as the full moon's brilliant radiance filled the midnight sky with sparkling stars. A stunning yet lethal sight emerged from the ocean's cooling sea salt breeze and its slowly moving waves. If it woke up, it would be like a sleeping god that would engulf you in the ocean. The man on the ship's deck was initially unimpressive, but despite the fact that some of his clothes appeared somewhat normal, such as his white button-up shirt that was only halfway buttoned up, revealing his muscular chest that was loose and untucked, he was anything but ordinary. He was dressed in loose brown trousers with floral patterns. He wore plain brown sandals on his feet and a crimson sash around his waist. However, that is where civilized attire ends because a weapon of some kind, resembling a sword and named a saber, was fastened to the man's crimson sash. Its sheath protruded from the man's left side and followed from his rear end. Although the handle's general design was similar to that of a typical saber, it was initially larger than most. The black flowing cape with its high collar, which was draped over the man's shoulders with the left side covering up where his left arm would be, was the next item that attracted the most attention. The man's somewhat sharp sapphire eyes, which resembled the eyes of a serene dragon poised to attack his enemies, set him apart from other men in terms of appearance. His skin tone was sufficiently tan to suggest that he had recently taken a sunbathe. He had a short, untrimmed, and disheveled beard. His face was composed, almost serene, but his eyes showed the worry that was gnawing at the back of his mind. However, the most remarkable feature that has earned this man's name is his somewhat long, straight, blood-red hair that gleams in the moonlight. 3 jagged scars ran across the man's left eye, and the rest of his hair was combed back, with the fringes pulled to either side of his face. This man, who was a good 5 feet 8 inches, had a lean, muscular build that demonstrated his strength and speed, but he also had a laid-back, lazy posture. Shanks, also known as red-haired Shanks, was a former apprentice of Gold D. Roger and is currently the captain of the notorious red-haired pirates, who are also the second ruling Yonko, 4 emperors, of the New World. And if people were to look at the man now, they would assume that he was simply staring out at the ocean, which is a stunning mistress. However, people who were aware of the recent global events would be aware of Shanks' thoughts. He was thinking about the issues at hand so quickly that it was frightening. The events were deeply upsetting him, and what was worse was that they involved someone he respected. Shanks sighed as he looked down at the sea. The world government has now put Ace up for execution after Whitebeard first refuses to order him to pull Ace back from searching for Teach. The man then defeats Ace, giving him the title of Shichibukai. It's clearly a declaration of war with Whitebeard. I told him, but he refused, and this is what happened. I was worried about this. After letting out a sigh, Shanks silently removed a necklace of some kind from around his neck. It was held together by a silver chain, and the focal point of the necklace was a silver pendant of some kind. It appeared remarkably lethal, but for some reason, it brought a smile to Shanks' face, not the usual or most cheerful smiles that seemed to split his face. However, it was just a typical smile that was tinged with both love and sadness. With a crown-like design on top, the silver pendant featured roaring dragons on both sides, their maws open to attack their foes and their claws outstretched to strike. The pendant's sockets were tiny, red, glittering rubies, and at the bottom was a skull and crossbones that appeared to support the 2 dragons. However, the focal point of this pendant was a kind of gem, with a strong violet hue. Red and blue streaks were visible inside the gem, adding to its distinctive gleam. Shanks spoke while stroking the gem with his thumb. Shanks said, "I never did want to do this. But to save Ace and, if our information is correct, Luffy from certain death, I will need both of your assistance. I know the promise I made to never summon you two, so you could rest. But this world needs you two once again. Even now the tides of fate are churning and the upcoming war is coming. I can't do this alone no matter how strong I am. I need your help." Shanks' eyes slowly turned it over and read the words that were written there, revealing a secret message that was only visible to him. Never forget that Shanks is always available. Just give us a call when you really need assistance. When you find yourself in a tight spot, keep in mind that we are here to help. A single tear dropped from his eye as he clutched the pendant. "I know. And it seems like I have no other choice. I'm sorry, but it's time for you two to make another appearance. This world needs you both again for the era that lies ahead. Just like you both helped Captain Roger in his time, I need you too." Shanks then removed the necklace and put it in a sort of bottle with a rolled-up piece of paper inside. Shanks held the bottle outwards over the ship's railing after inserting the necklace inside the bottle and then plugging it up. Shanks closed his eyes and spoke intently. "By the grace of the Old One and the changing tides of the ocean, let God's word reverberate throughout the ocean and all of its inhabitants as your churning currents spin and stir. Let God speak to you and listen to my request, Old Ones. Rulers of the ocean, awaken again." He said that, and then his smile got even bigger when he saw the necklace glow from what he had said, almost like a blue fire. After finishing his work, did Shanks toss the bottle into the ocean, knowing that doing so would prevent countless deaths and, consequently, the deaths of Ace and Luffy as well? Particularly considering the two he has requested. After idly watching the bottle splash into the water, he turned around and closed his eyes in finality. He spoke as he made his way to his quarters. Shanks returned to his ship to get ready to go to Whitebeard and assist him in battling the Marines and saving Ace and his protege Luffy. "It's time. For change. I got a battle to prepare for," he said. Unfortunately, he will be delayed for some time. Fortunately, he sent the message. The bottle sank into the water, but he never saw it abruptly vanish in a blue flash of fire. New World. Unknown place. There were many things on the wet sand of one island that was part of the New World and its perilous oceans. The island was home to animals of all sizes, from tiny creatures to giants. Even the most seasoned scholar would be in a panic over unique animals that have never been seen before or artifacts found deep within this island. A tiny blue flash appeared on these sands, and then a bottle of some kind slowly drifted in from the ocean's wave. It floated onto the sandy shore after a final wave, then immediately rolled before brushing against someone's feet. When the individual picked up the bottle and looked inside, it was unclear who they were. Before a gloomy expression appeared on the figure's face, did the person simply freeze for a moment? He muttered, "I see. So it comes to this, has it? Very well. It was getting boring here anyway," and then he returned to the jungle, holding the letter and bottle in one hand and the necklace firmly in the other. The ground beneath the figure's feet trembles with every step, and the tree itself is now cracking and breaking due to the figure's presence. The wildlife simply ran away when they had the chance, or it was too late to escape unconscious after detecting the person's intimidating aura. There was something in the air that caused all living things to bow down in total submission in any manner they could. The individual spoke as he moved through the jungle. Little Luffy and Ace are in trouble, aren't they? And that old prick Whitebeard, always the naive idiot that he is. Shanks, you really have messed up, haven't you? As he ventured farther into the jungle, he pondered aimlessly as the darkness engulfed him. I guess it's time to get ready. Before long, a voice that was both cold and demanding reverberated throughout the entire island. For war. The arrival of two individuals will soon rock the Marines and the entire world government to their foundations. A pair of legends. Lily. Queen's throne room on Amazon. There were 5 figures in the throne room of Amazon Lily's ruling empress, 3 of whom were the Gorugan-san-shime, Gorgon sisters. The last 2 featured a petite woman who appeared to be very elderly, holding a newspaper in one hand and a walking cane in the other. Elder Nyan was the former ruler of the Kuja tribe and the empress of the Amazon Lily. The final individual was a 5 feet 7 inches teen with tanned skin, a trim yet muscular frame that demonstrated a fighter's physique. He was dressed simply in a light blue button-up vest, red shorts, and open-toed sandals, but a simple yet well-known straw hat with a red ribbon around the base was worn on his head. This teenager had a scar beneath his left eye and shaggy, untidy black hair that partially obscured his eyes. This individual was Portgas D. Ace's adopted brother and the renowned Straw Hat Pirates captain, Monkey D. Luffy. 2 very tall women were standing between the throne. Boa Sandersonia was on the left, and Boa Marigold was on the right. The eldest of the 3 sisters, the Empress of Amazon Lily, and the captain of the Kuja Pirates, however, occupied the throne. With a distressed yet inquisitive look on her heart-shaped face, she sat on the throne, her smooth, pale, milky white skin simply glowing in the sunlight. Her tall 6 feet 3 inches frame and slender build, which revealed her hidden strength and speed, were evident even when she was seated. She wore a loose sarong that showed off her long, thin legs with the Kuja symbol on it, a red revealing blouse that revealed her voluptuous bust, and dark blue eyes and long, raven black hair that appeared to be made entirely of silk. Her red high-heel pumps completed the ensemble, which included a long white cape draped over her shoulders and flowing down her back with a pair of epaulettes. Kaikoku Jote Boa Hankaku, Pirate Empress Boa Hancock, the Kuja Pirates captain and the first female Shichibukai, was this woman. She is known as the Hebehime, or Snake Princess, and is in charge of the Amazon Lily Kingdom. Her face revealed that she was both curious and troubled, but her eyes betrayed her as she stared at Luffy with an almost shocked expression. According to her, this man not only infuriated the government and created a commotion in the Grand Line, but he also struck a Tenryubito, also called the Sakai Kizoku, World Noble. A Tenryubito, Celestial Dragon, an entity that faces the wrath of the entire world government if she is hurt in any way. To be honest, Hancock initially found it hard to believe, but after Luffy himself confirmed it, she had a near mental breakdown. Hancock's eyes widened so much when she stared at Luffy that it startled her sisters a little. Why did she have wide eyes? She saw Luffy's cloaked form behind him, and as she stared at him, she saw that he was staring back at her with those eyes. His cloak was billowing from the smoke and wind of battle, and there were tears and bloodstains on it, along with the bodies of world nobles at his feet. She couldn't resist chuckling bitterly, drawing the attention of all those in the chambers. Monkey D. Since only 2 people have ever been documented in history to have caused such chaos against the Tenryubito, Luffy, you are not the first person to rebel against them. He spoke solemnly, but when she used the word, him, it made both Marigold and Sandersonia laugh. I never thought I'd meet another person to do such a thing. And I don't know why, but you Straw Hat. Remind me so much of him, he said. They scowled in their minds as they remembered that person, and they could hear the melancholy and loneliness in her voice. Luffy tilted his head in confusion and blinked foolishly, not really understanding, which Hancock observed, forcing her to speak again. Hancock explained her and her sister's past, the marks on their backs, and how they were slaves to the Tenryubito. Let me explain. Since you are a person I can respect in your actions against the Tenryubito and hiding my sister's mark from the other women, I shall tell you of these 2 people and of our past. However, at that point, a merman named Fisher Tiger broke into Marijoy, freed all the slaves he could, and killed anyone who stood in his way. I initially believed the man to be a monster, but his actions made him the first person to ever oppose Tenryubito. She said, we were among those slaves who were set free on that day. Her sisters looked down, remembering a part of the past they really didn't want to think about. I see then that explains why that mark looks like Hatchin's but they are a bit different, Luffy said, frowning in confusion. However, I would like to know who the other person who opposed those bubbleheads is." He smiled as he spoke, which Hancock found amusing but unexpected nonetheless. That man's smile was the same one. He was the one who prevented my sisters from being dragged back into slavery during our nighttime escape, so I'll tell you about him. He was the man who saved us that night by eliminating every Tenryubito that was pursuing us. She said, he was the one who made sure we slaves were able to escape in time while defeating those that came after us. Her eyes were glassy with a distant look, and her voice was solemn but joyful. Luffy blinked at this, but he had to inquire after learning that this individual had not only confronted and killed Tenryubito, but had also engaged Marines to ensure the freedom of the slaves. "Can you recall his name?" When Hancock saw the question, he looked down. "No, I only recall the night he saved us. When I asked him his name, he replied, Maelstrom." "Bayou, Luffy. You remind me so much of him." "Why is that?" she said, looking at Luffy and secretly hoping for one more encounter with that man. She only wished for one more. The Grand Line. Push down. Impel Down was a massive underground prison located deep within the world government's maximum security facility. According to legend, there are 6 levels in the legendary prison, and each criminal is assigned to a level based on the crimes they have committed. However, buried deep in the 6th floor of this enormous prison was a man who would soon be put to death. This individual was none other than Portgas D. Ace, son of Portgas D. Rouge and Gold D. Roger, and adoptive brother of one Monkey D. Luffy. He sat on the stone floor, his face expressionless, his wrists and ankles shackled by seastone cuffs. Ace's former adversary Jinbei, who was shackled on his far left, was also in this cell. This enormous fishman also had a rather monotone face, but the merman's eyes were frighteningly focused on something. "Ace, if you and Luffy had simply enlisted in the Marines as I had advised you two to do all those years ago, this would not have occurred. Just look where it ended up." An individual sitting Indian style in front of Ace, wearing a severe yet dejected expression, said, from outside the cell. This man had a vice admiral mantle draped over his shoulders and was dressed in the standard uniform of a Marine officer. The man had dark skin, a few wrinkles, and a scar around his left eye. He had short, spiky gray hair and a gray beard. The man was a good 6 feet 0 inches with a broad chest and a good build overall. Monkey D. Garp was a hero of the Marines and vice admiral of the world government. He is also the father of the revolutionary Monkey D. Dragon, the grandfather of Monkey D. Luffy, and the adopted grandfather of Portgas D. Ace. And he was looking at his adopted grandson at the moment with a look of self-loathing mixed with sadness. "Gramps, I don't know if you're getting senile in your old age, but you should know by now with the blood of 2 global scale criminals flowing through our veins it would be impossible for us to have become Marines anyway," Ace said, glancing at his grandfather before continuing. Garp scowled, knowing this even though he didn't want to acknowledge it. Ace was absolutely correct when he stated that the Marines would not accept the sons of their most vile adversaries, regardless of the ties Garp. They would immediately kill them, if anything, for instance, right now. He said, "That doesn't mean you two should have become pirates." Ace simply grunted in response, and the sound of his shackles reverberated throughout the quiet prison floor. Ace's face was now filled with laughter. "Please, Gramps, there was nothing that could stop us. Luffy and I enjoy sailing the sea and leading free lives rather than being restrained by the foolish military dogs that the world government keeps on a leash. We are living the dream that Sabo, him, and I had. But that dream was snatched away when Sabo was murdered by the very nobles you defend." He hissed angrily, causing Garp to flinch a little. The tense atmosphere was so thick that it could have been sliced with a butter knife, and a silence quickly ensued. That was prior to Ace speaking. "Gramps. Kill me," he said, and although he didn't appear shocked or surprised by the teenager's remarks, he was secretly blaming him for not making a greater effort to get Ace and Luffy out of the piracy life. Garp shook his head and said, "I'm sorry, Ace, but even if I killed you, it wouldn't stop Whitebeard and his forces. If anything, it would just encourage them on." Ace grinned as he explained. "TCH, I doubt it. Who would want to keep me safe? Who would be interested in saving me? The son of one of the world's most evil men. Do you know any Gramps who would stop at nothing to spare me from this death I know I'm going to get?" Garp's expression changed from one of firmness and sternness to one of regret and sadness, which shocked Ace inside. "This, Ace, was the words of your own father, Gold D. Roger, who spoke to me prior to his own execution. His words were so full of regret and sorrow that they startled the wide-eyed Ace. That, Ace, I can answer with only this. The rulers of the sea shall only rise up once more when they are thou called upon. When their family is threatened will the 2 rulers of the ocean appear once more. The 2, however, failed to notice Jinbei's wide, incredulous eyes or the slight shuddering of his arm. It was unbelievable to him. Not only did Garp and his older brother Tiger know what he just said, but the entire known aquatic race did as well. Their king Neptune himself has been on guard against any disturbances in the ocean's tides because of these exact words. Only Gold D. Roger and one other individual knew these words. Neither he nor Tiger were aware of them. He was only aware that Neptune and Queen Odahime knew these two individuals. It was said that they were so fond of and revered that they were considered members of their family. So much so that there were rumors that one of these individuals had been included in a contract that Neptune had arranged through some sort of proposal. There were rumors that this individual had been spotted on Merman Island, alongside Neptune, Odahime, and their children, primarily the young Shirahoshi. That saying is supposed to be related to the real rulers of the sea, so it couldn't be. Does this mean anything? Why does it feel like such an omen that it makes my skin crawl? What is this? He was unaware of how accurate he was, as this prophecy would soon come to pass. After 1 week, Marineford. What word best describes Marineford? The Marines' headquarters, at this moment. A peaceful location. A land of stone with well-trained, firm soldiers who keep the peace. A stone-built town where citizens, Marines, and inquisitive kids would all be running through the streets. Not right. It was utter chaos. In fact, Whitebeard and his allies were enraged by Portgas d'Ace's execution, which sparked the conflict between Whitebeard and the Marines. Naturally, Sengoku considered all possible precautions, so he assembled the 3 admirals and issued a summons to all Shichibukai in the world. Additionally, he summoned the Marines who were stationed all over the world to prepare for this conflict. And what a conflict it was! Whitebeard arrived as anticipated, bringing with him his own signature ship, the Moby Dick, and his enormous fleet of pirates and allies. The legendary pirate in Yonko arrived with a vengeance. Hisazan had been taken from him, and he was a furious father who allowed this to happen because of that. However, as his troops rushed into the conflict, an even more startling event occurred. A ship carrying the released prisoners from Impel Down dropped out of the sky. Among them were a select few who attracted the greatest attention. Among them were the former Shichibukai, Jinbei, and Crocodile. The other was a revolutionary named Emporio Ivankov. The most startling individual, however, was Monkey D. Luffy himself, who descended with this ship loaded with runaway criminals. Since this elderly man was the one that his brother Ace looked up to, Luffy also defended Whitebeard from Crocodile's attempt to harm him during that period. Then, however, Luffy challenged Whitebeard to decide who would be the next Pirate King and who was bringing Ace back. Naturally, the man was upset with the child, but he soon smiled before taking the challenge, which caused Luffy to enter the battle with his allies trailing behind him. At the same time, Sengoku revealed to the world Luffy and Ace's ancestry and the true identities of their fathers. Only a small number of people in the war were already aware of this, which shocked practically everyone. However, the fight for Ace's freedom and against the Marines ensued. It was essentially a disaster, with both sides losing. Both pirates and Marines perished, but the wrath and rage of both sides continued to grow as one side sought to preserve the justice they were supposed to uphold while the other side sought to save their fellow Nakamas. Even if the Whitebeard pirates were fighting hard, it was blatantly obvious that they were losing to the combined strength of the 3 admirals. Borsellino, also known as Admiral Kizaru. Kuzan, also known as Admiral Aokiji. And Sakazuki, also known as Sakazuki but known as Admiral Akainu in the Marines. Additionally, the assembled Shichibukai included Don Quixote Doflamingo, Basor Mukuma, Bartholomew Kuma, Gecko Moria, Gecko Mariah, Dracule, Hawk, Eyes Mihawk, and the reluctant Boa Hancock, who chose to protect Luffy from the pirates rather than engage in combat. She didn't want to kill someone who behaved like that man. However, that wasn't the only fighting force because as the war dragged on, a man named Sentimaru showed up with an army of 20 pacifistas. Although some of these artificial cyborgs were destroyed by Hancock herself for attacking Luffy, they were already swiftly defeating the pirates. However, no one ever noticed the 2 cloaked figures standing guard over the very top of Marineford's fortress as the war raged on. Their cloaks billowed in the chaotic winds as the cries of the fallen filled the air and battle clashes reverberated throughout the region. Although no one could see or feel them, the surrounding area appeared to change as the clouds began to gradually swirl around them as they grew darker. The war was on the verge of being struck by an impending storm. Hard. The 2 figures saw Whitebeard fending off the Marines who were attempting to stop Luffy, as well as Luffy punching Garp off the man. Made bridge before reaching Ace. With a voice that sounded like the lovely melody of a goddess singing to her child, one of the figures turned to face the other and spoke. The now identified woman's voice said, Look at them, little Luffy.kun and Ace.kun have grown up so much. And Hancock. Chan as well, what a stunning beauty she's become. The person beside her simply nodded slightly after tilting his head slightly. With a baritone voice that was so intensely firm that it would have likely put the most seasoned Marines in a coma, the other said, "True, the kids have grown up so much since the last time I saw them. Garp's training must have done this some good, and Hancock. Chan has indeed grown into a beautiful woman." The woman nodded and then turned to face the battle below, where 5 pacifistas were nearly destroyed as they attacked the pirates, with each Shichibukai firing at the commanders of each division of Whitebeard's crew. Observing the remaining Marines assault Ace and Luffy as they run away. "We were called to help them. Let's get to it," the man said, and the woman simply nodded before moving to the building's edge. As the two began to lean forward, did the woman say anything? "Yes, let's. The kids need us now." The two then silently leaned off the fortress building and began to fall freely in the direction of the battlefield. An aura of some kind began to envelop them as they raced to their assigned spot. The woman was glowing a deep crimson red, and the other was glowing a brilliant golden, until they both simply vanished. As the fighting echoed around him, the changed Sengoku looked up and scowled. What was that? Alongside Ace and Luffy, Luffy and Ace were pounding their way through innumerable Marines while running and fighting their way through them in a desperate attempt to move out of the way. Despite their exhaustion, they continued to fight because they knew that if they stopped, trouble would arise. Many Marines caught in the crossfire of both attacks were either burned alive or pummeled to death as Luffy used his Gear Second and in conjunction with his Gomu, Jet Gatling, and Ace's Hotarubi, Firefly Light, before using his own combination with Hidaruma, Fiery Doll. Ace looked at his younger adopted brother as they sped away from the execution platform and said, "You've grown stronger, Luffy." The younger pirate simply glanced in his direction before smiling. Thanks, perhaps I can defeat you now." This simply caused Ace to smile as well while they were running. "You wish, Luffy." He said that before the two stopped because Aokiji was standing in front of them, staring at them with a sad and bored expression. The air around them began to grow colder by the moment, and the ground was already covered in ice. Aokiji stepped forward and said, "You're not going anywhere, fire." Fist Ace, and Straw Hat Luffy, the two boys said, scowling at the Admiral before Ace moved forward and touched Luffy's shoulder to get his attention. He stepped forward and spoke. Aokiji and Ace both charged with their own Akuma no Mi powers after saying, "You've done enough, Luffy. It's time I protect you." The nearby Marines and pirates either failed to notice this or were immobilized at the scene of the impending conflict. Did they declare their attacks in their own words? Isukai. Ice Block. Pheasant Beak, Bokiji Kuchibashi. With that, Aokiji collected a huge quantity of ice, which he then swung in Ace's direction, transforming into a gigantic, winged pheasant in a single blow. Ace pushed both of his engulfed arms outward as he saw it coming. Mirror Flame, or Kyokan. Ace pulsated the flames outward, shooting them toward the ice pheasant and creating a massive wall of pure orange-red flames. The intense heat of Ace's flames caused nearby Marines to catch fire, making it difficult for pirates to move as ice slowly moved up their bodies. The heat and coldness already filled the area, causing a slight fog. Haha! Before their attacks clashed, they yelled together. Boom! Before a thick steam erupted from the two attacks, covering the area, a huge shockwave tore through the area when the two attacks collided, blowing the unprepared Luffy back a few feet and the nearby Marines and pirates back. Luffy and Ace were both staring at the unhurt Aokiji while the steam melted his own attack in the middle, leaving his head and upper body completely gone. When Ace saw this, he held his ground as it fell to the ground, shattering into a million pieces of ice. "Intel. My sons, I'm giving my last order to everyone." When Ace, Luffy, and the Whitebeard pirates heard this, they turned around to find their captain seriously injured but still alive. They listened to his remarks again before objecting. "However, Pops," Marco cried out, but when Edward spoke again, he and the other pirates who were protesting were silenced. "Silence. The new era doesn't need an old relic like me. There isn't a ship in the seas that can hold me. This is a captain's final order, and you will follow it through. You will return to the New World safely. I'll remain here to demonstrate to these marine brats what a real pirate can accomplish. Go!" Did Whitebeard call out to Ace and Luffy, his crew? Sengoku, the Admiral, and the Marines in the vicinity all had shocked or gravely serious looks on their faces. After hearing this, Marco shed a few tears and bowed his head before continuing. "Excellent, Captain." The commander of the 1st Division shouted. His eyes were watering from his father's words, and other Whitebeard pirates were also crying. Whitebeard spoke again as the crew began to fall back. My sons. Avoid looking back. We will overthrow the world OGVERNMENT, the world nobles, and the Marines. The era of piracy will conquer forever as timings change. Avoid looking back. He rears his fist in his final words to his crew and sons, evoking Sengoku's and the Admiral's shocked expressions. Haha. Whitebeard swung his fist, causing a quake bubble to encircle it. He then struck the air, causing blue cracks to appear. Suddenly, the ground began to shake, and then there was a tremendous uproar as an earthquake erupted from Whitebeard's targeted fist, sending ripples through the ground and into the Marine base headquarters. Ace and Luffy stared in disbelief as the area was torn apart by cracks and upheavals, with Marines losing their balance and falling through the cracks or falling debris. To Ace, it was evidence of his captain and father's strength, and to Luffy, it revealed that Whitebeard was not only admired by Ace and possessed power beyond his comprehension, but also loved his crew so much that he was willing to give his life for them. His regard for Whitebeard increased just by that action. Sengoku erupted in rage upon witnessing the collapse of the Marine headquarters, while the admirals, including Borsalino, scowled. In front of the irate Marines, Whitebeard himself stood tall and commanding despite his serious wounds. He spoke with a victorious smile on his face. Marines, I'm putting you to the test, to win this battle once and for all. When Whitebeard saw that the Marines were almost charging at him with swords and guns drawn, he grabbed his Basento and used his Gura Gura no Mi powers to create a quake bubble that covered his blade. He swung, sending the first wave of Marines high into the air and causing a whirlwind shockwave that disrupted and destroyed them completely. He then struck another wave of Marines with his quake bubbled fist, sending a shockwave that blew them away and destroyed innumerable buildings in Marineford. When two Marines attempted to stop the escaping pirates, they created another earthquake bubble and then punched the ground, causing another one. This time, a huge upheaval erupted from the earth and passed straight through the Marines who were pursuing his sons. Pops. When Whitebeard heard this, he turned away from the reassembling Marines and fixed his gaze on Ace, who was currently kneeling on both hands and knees with his head lowered. Ace spoke while tears were streaming freely from his eyes. Pops. When Whitebeard simply raised his hand, he was stopped. There's no need for words, Ace. I just want to know if I was a good father, said the teary-eyed Whitebeard, to which Ace's tears only grew more intense before he spoke. Of course. When Whitebeard heard this, he simply laughed heartily before turning back to the Marines. Ace, seeing this, got back up and turned around before speeding off without ever turning around, as his father had instructed. Come on, Luffy, it's time to leave. The teenager in the straw hat nodded in agreement, and the two of them hurried ahead with the Whitebeard pirates. Ace heard someone talk as they were fleeing with the other pirates. As they approached the docked boat, Marines turned to Admiral Akainu and said, Admiral, they're attempting to get on board. The man merely frowned and then threw back his right fist, which was dripping with Magu no Mi abilities. The Great Eruption, or Dai Funka. Throwing his fist outward, he launched an enormous rocket into the escaping pirates, causing them to burn and melt in the heat of the blazing magma. The Akainu spoke while glancing at Dragon's and Roger's escaping sons. What a bunch of cowards you Whitebeard pirate scum are, running off immediately after grabbing fire. Fist Ace, however, Whitebeard is no different, as he is nothing more than a failure of the past. When Ace heard this, he stopped in a slide, and Luffy stopped a few feet away. Ace. The teenager just gave Akainu a furious look in return. What just did you say? His tone was frightfully cold, but there was a strong hint of murderous intent that persisted. However, Akainu was unfazed and continued to speak. Whitebeard lost to your father, Roger, and is nothing more than a fool. Even after his own death, he was unable to ascend to the throne. Whitebeard will always be a failure in the afterlife. The Admiral's words nearly set Ace on fire, and he ignored those attempting to pull him back and took a step forward. I'm going to kill you, Satsuki. As he gathered flames into his right arm, his arms burst into flames. He disregarded his brother's attempts to turn around and his screams and yells to return. This man had insulted his father and savior, and all he wanted to do was kill him. Ace retracted his fist and spoke. You have no knowledge of Pops, so put your words in your mouth and preach justice. We call this period, Whitebeard. Akainu scowled at Ace's remarks after hearing this and then threw back his own fist. Did they both thrust their fists outward while yelling and attacking? Dai Funka. Fire Fist, Heiken. However, when they collided, the two attacks burst into fists from both users' arms. Boom. As the two difficult attacks fought for supremacy, there was a minor explosion of magma, fire, and smoke. However, Akainu's attack soon prevailed, resulting in another explosion, this time with some of Ace's left arm being burned by the heat from the magma. Gah! Ace screamed, clutching his severely injured arm as he fell to the ground. Luffy began, but he collapsed to his knees, panting from sheer exhaustion and coughing up blood. Luffy, you've reached your limit, Jinbei said, kneeling in front of him and wearing a worried expression. However, the teenager didn't give a damn because he had to get Ace and his brother out of here safely. However, did he fail to notice Akainu's stare as he looked down and saw his brother's Vivre card idly reaching out to retrieve it? I will not let you two go. Pirate King Gold D. Roger and Revolutionary Dragons. Their sons becoming brothers is something to be genuinely feared. Downright scary. Ace only had the strength to speak after realizing what the man was going to do. Hey, no wait. But it was too late because Akainu leapt over Ace and was ready to hit the teenager. Unable to respond in time, Jinbei could only look on in horror as Akainu got ready to attack Luffy. Before Ace appeared in front of Luffy, his front facing him and ready to take the hit, there was a flash. Luffy saw this when he looked up. However, clang! This stops here, Marine, a voice that somehow reverberated throughout the battlefield said. Attracting the interest of everyone nearby, including Whitebeard, Sengoku, the Shichibukai, and the Admiral. Both the smoker and the Tashigi looked in the direction of the voice, but they saw something that made the cigar in the smoker's mouth go completely slack. Even the other two admirals had shocked expressions in their eyes, and the stunning woman's glasses drooped past her wide eyes. However, the fact that Garp, Whitebeard, and Sengoku turned their attention to this indicated surprise, or, in the case of Garp and Whitebeard, shock. When the Shichibukai saw the scene, they all reacted. Doflamingo was grinning, but it was more maniacal than usual, and Gecko was also grinning, though his eyes were questioning. Although Mihawk was wearing an unusually wide-eyed expression, Kuma, who was thought to be entirely cybernetic, displayed a slight look of surprise before breaking into an uncharacteristic smile. Although Hancock's body shook and trembled in response to what she was seeing, she also felt her eyes tremble and become clouded with something unexpected. As she gazed at the scene before her, a tear escaped her eye. She took a step forward and spoke so softly that no one could have heard her. It's the same as his. Circa could it be? This. Hockey. Because she was seeing something that was absolutely unbelievable, just like everyone else. For both pirate and marine, it was something that would always be etched in their hearts and minds. Alongside Ace and Luffy, Ace experienced excruciating pain, searing and burning flesh, and even his own death when he faced Akainu's attack, which was meant for his younger brother. He had arrived just before the Admiral finished swinging, and he was crouching in front of Luffy, his arms extended out behind him, his knees bent, ready to deflect the blow. However, as a gentle hand was placed on his burned arm, he felt a warm, comforting aura fill him rather than the attack, the pain, and his life slipping away. Ace opened his eyes slowly, confused, to see his younger brother staring past him and at him in utter shock. He was even more perplexed when he attempted to turn around and heard a voice in his ear that sounded so angelic and almost maternal. After hearing this, the audience turned to see a hooded, cloaked figure standing next to Ace. That's enough, Ace. You and Luffy have done enough. Just relax. A green glowing energy outlined her hands as they clasped his burned arm. What? He said, before collapsing to his knees from the weariness he was experiencing. Ace was nervous, but he couldn't deny that the energy emanating from this unfamiliar woman felt soothing and was somehow relieving his fatigue. He felt the woman's other hand press against him, supporting him. He never witnessed the gradual healing of the wounds on his arm and body. Don't worry. You're both in good hands now. Let's deal with things now. Ace wasn't sure why, but this voice seemed so familiar to him that it gave him a sense of security, similar to a mother's tender embrace. The same feeling of familiarity filled his own eyes as he glanced at his brother. Then he recalled what she had said just now. What do you mean? Bys. The woman simply burst into a heavenly sounding giggle that sounded like Cammy's own melody and angelic trumpets. Look behind you, he said, and when he did, he was completely taken aback by what he saw, and like the others, his eyes widened until they seemed to be about to pop out of their sockets. Because behind him, and to everyone's surprise, was a figure wearing a similar hood as the woman. However, this person's more muscular body, rather than the woman's curves, indicated that he was a man. However, it was his actions in front of Akainu that truly caught his attention. The man was preventing Akainu from attacking, with his bare hand alone. For a moment, he wondered why the Admiral was shocked when he saw Akainu's shocked expression, but then he noticed a hint of fear in the man's eyes and wondered if he really wanted to know who this man was to make even an Admiral feel that way. Clutching his hand, the man gathered up his Busashoku haki into his left leg before delivering a bone crushing kick to the admiral's face, propelling him past both marines and pirates. So pathetic. To attack these boys as exhausted as they are. Truly, you marines have no honor. You Akainu are the worst of them all. You prey upon those that cannot defend themselves, proclaiming your so-called justice, when you are nothing more than a murderer. Ah! Sakazuki shouted before he nearly crashed into the ground, forming a trench that was a mile wide. He continued to skid backward, but stopped when he struck one of the upheavals that Whitebeard had made. The cloaked figure, having fully recovered from his attack on Sakazuki, turned to face the stunned admiral, Sengoku, Garp, and Whitebeard. He spoke without showing any signs of fear as he peered at them from the shadows of his hood. How long has it been, Garp, Sengoku, and Whitebeard? The three men's eyes widened at the sound of this voice, as did Hancock's and Mihawk's. Sengoku was already pale, but hearing that voice made him even paler. So you've both come, have you? He said firmly, masking the anxiety and fear that were building inside of him. Many people reacted in shock as the two cloaked figures simply grabbed their hoods and then pulled them back. Kizaru and Aokiji both widened their eyes and then staggered in disbelief. In spite of his injuries, Whitebeard was now smiling maniacally. The two people Garp was seeing were making it difficult for him to avoid going into cardiac arrest. Sengoku, who was now as pale as a ghost, broke out in a nervous sweat but kept his emotions to himself so as not to alarm his marines. Even though he was internally afraid at the moment. Yes, a long time has passed. Uzumaki d Naruto. Uzumaki d Kushina. Quietness. The battlefield, which had once been occupied by marines and pirates engaged in combat, was completely silent. Only now were all of them, whether they were pirates or marines, completely taken aback. Upon hearing those two names, even the escaping Whitebeard pirates stumbled in disbelief. Marco himself was the one who largely collapsed to the ground in sheer shock after turning around and disobeying his captain's orders, only to have his eyes enlarge. It can't be. Kushina and Naruto. They supposedly passed away long ago when Roger was put to death. Many of the people who remembered the two were thinking the same things. More specifically, that being Sengoku, Garp, and the Admiral. Doflamingo himself was observing the now exposed pair with a grave expression that had never been seen on his face before. However, Mihawk was observing them both with a smirk on his face and a look of respect in his eyes that momentarily shifted to the exposed Kushina. So, you two have returned. I wonder what mayhem you'll cause this time. Due to his complete cybernetic state, Kuma was only able to gaze at the now exposed Uzumaki with a mildly surprised expression. His eyes did flash in some sort of recognition, but Hancock must have been the most peculiar since she was not only staggering toward them in disbelief, but tears were streaming down her sparkling eyes. Is it true that those eyes are the same ones? She couldn't stop staring at the now exposed Uzumaki, who was primarily Naruto, while the woman next to him was tending to Ace and Luffy's injuries. However, she froze when the male Uzumaki looked at her, causing her to simply stop. Her unshed tears simply fell from her eyes when she saw those sapphire orbs. His slight grin simply warmed her heart and made her feel better. Kizaru and Aokiji were doing everything they could to keep from fainting from sheer shock when they saw the two individuals they had never imagined seeing again. The very individuals who caused them to shudder in their boots. They were still able to recall what the two had done that day, and it continues to haunt them to this day. Admiral Sakazuki, their fellow admiral, was also present on the day the two appeared, so he knew too well. Soon after, a great deal of death occurred. They haven't aged a day since then, by Kami. But Sengoku and Garp were going through the worst of times as they stared at the two individuals they never wanted to see again. Sengoku was particularly troubled because he knew these two were far more dangerous than any pirate had ever been. Roger alone was the only one who could match them, and that was pushing it. They couldn't resist taking another look at their faces, and the sight of them made their very souls flinch in fear. Garp didn't hold anything back and simply looked down solemnly, something Naruto noticed but ignored. Whitebeard was at last well. In spite of his severe wounds and impending death, all he could do was smile maniacally. He was an elderly man, but his eyes simply stared at those two with a mixture of respect and excitement that filled his very being. To be honest, he could see his old rival Roger's smiling face behind them, staring at the Marines with nothing but murderous intent. I have no qualms about dying because I know that these two are here to protect the new age and usher in a whole new era with them leading it. He noticed that the two looked even better than he had ever seen them before, and they hadn't aged a day since he had last seen them. As he recalled their features from his youth and prime, he couldn't help but be amazed. He had the strength and agility to have easily erased Marineford from the map back when he was younger. When Kushina's hood was fully off, her angelic face and long, flowing red hair that resembled liquid blood were visible. No one could ever match the beauty of her heart-shaped face, which resembled the face of a goddess. Her violet eyes, which seemed to calm even the most enraged monster, remained as gentle and wrathful as ever. However, glaring into them could cause your heart to burst from the inside out. In comparison to others, her porcelain skin was so smooth that it glistened. In addition to healing the two teenagers' wounds, her hands were glowing with green energy. The two boys were perplexed by her mother-like smile. Then came Naruto, a white-bearded man whom he feared but respected, though not to the same extent as Kushina. Roger, his own rival, followed him to the ocean's ends and showed him unwavering respect. The bangs shadowed parts of his eyes, and his long, spiky, golden, black streaked hair, which covered most of his ears and fell past his neckline to his shoulder blades, appeared much longer but was concealed by the cloak. What sunlight could reach the darkening skies glinted on his tan, almost bronze skin. If you irritated him, his trademark sapphire piercing eyes might stab you and rip out your soul, but when he got mad, they could literally drop you to the ground. His eyes were softer and warmer when they looked at Luffy and the healing ace, but the slits in them only made him look more terrified. The blonde said, "Ace. Luffy. No worries, just rest and let Jinbei carry you two out of here." This further confused the two, but Jinbei simply stared at them more intently. He tried to recall something, but his eyes went glassy. "Something significant. Who are you guys, and why are you assisting us?" Ace, who had grown up knowing that people wouldn't help you without a reason, asked suspiciously. He adhered to this even during the war and would do so indefinitely, though he blinked when the man abruptly turned around before placing both of his hands on Luffy's and his own heads, causing them to blink incoherently. "Well, that guy with the fro mentioned our names. My name is Uzumaki d Naruto, and my beautiful wife's name is Uzumaki d Kushina. As for why we're assisting you, do we really need an excuse to support our own family?" he said with a smile that was so similar to Roger's that it gave people a little chill. However, everyone who heard this fell silent. Are they struggling with what they just heard? Family? These boys had relatives besides their fathers and Garp himself. Many questions were raised by those who were unaware of Naruto or Kushina, but for those who were, their eyes widened to the point where they would have burst from their heads. What? Smoker sputtered as he looked at the two, his eyes widening so much that he dropped his long, forgotten cigar to the floor, his finger pointing shakily at them, fear evident in his eyes. Tashigi was unable to speak because she was too enthralled with the two and the way the man kicked an admiral of Akainu's level as if it were easy. She tried to hide her flushed cheeks by looking down as her cheeks began to slightly heat up from staring at his face. What am I doing wrong? Garp scowled before lowering his head to avoid Sengoku's examining eyes and Kushina and Naruto's betrayed expressions. When he sensed their glares at him, he felt the weight of the greatest guilt fall upon him. He was certain that two extremely irate eyes would be on him if he looked up. With their jaws hilariously on the ground, or in Luffy's case, lowered and extended far beyond that, the two brothers could only gape up at the two who gazed at them with amusement. Did they hear correctly? Were they relatives? How is it that they only knew the names of their respective fathers and that Garp was their grandfather? How? Said Luffy Ace, too stunned to say anything. Naruto simply ruffled Luffy's hair, causing him to blink incomprehensibly, and then he turned back to face the assembling admirals, marines, and Whitebeard. "Don't worry, Ace, and you will realize later. Both of you need to leave right now. We'll be taking care of this from now on." Before the two could respond, Naruto swiftly knocked them out in the neck, causing them to fall forward into Kushina's arms. She then walked up to the startled Jinbei and smiled gently at the fishman. The fishman simply nodded slowly before she placed the two over his shoulder and sped off, followed by the Whitebeard pirates. "Jinbei-san, do us a favor and get those two boys out of here. We'll protect your back. Too long have we been away from the two. Go and take them on Trafalgar Law and his submarine. He and his medics can heal the two. Now get going." When the Vice Admiral saw this, he said, "Fire. First Ace and Straw Hat Luffy are escaping after them." But before Sengoku or the admirals could say anything, Naruto scowled when he heard this. Before emerging in front of the charging marines, which included more than 100 officers and vice admirals, the blonde man simply disappeared. Then, without warning, he simply glared at them while releasing a powerful pulse of Haoshoku haki of the color of the conquering king. As a result, the marines and those in the line of fire simply dropped dead, brainless, and mush in a swirl of wind and a pulse from Naruto. Naruto simply glared up at the people who witnessed this, causing another pulse to strike from his body and cause a crater to form in the ground. "You Marines aren't leaving. If you want to fight, you fight us." He said this before bringing his leg down and stomping the ground, causing it to tremble and shake. To everyone's surprise and Whitebeard's amusement, the ground and water shook and shot upwards in the area where more Marines were pursuing Jinbei. Before the two of them looked back at the stern Sengoku, who was now standing in front of the destroyed execution platform, he nodded toward Kushina, causing her to nod as well. The nearby Marines were now staring at them as they brandished their weapons, and Garp, who was also wearing a stone firm expression, was standing next to him. In their presence, Kizaru and Aokiji both have serious expressions on their faces, though Aokiji's is more fearful. Then came the Shichibukai, and Naruto and Kushina gave them a lethal look, with the exception of Mihawk and Hancock. However, Kuma's now monotone face was simply looking down at them. The two admirals were flanked by the Shichibukai. As the two Uzumakis looked down at their adversaries, they noticed Whitebeard staring at them with a mixture of amusement and sadness. The emotionless Sengoku said, "Why are two of you legends like yourselves back here? It was thought you both died." Naruto merely glanced at him before clenching his fist and injecting his haki, which caused an all-around pulse of haki to knock out some of the less experienced Marines, killing them instantly and causing those with experience to simply pass out from the sheer pressure on their minds. As Naruto stared at the stone firm but pale Sengoku, Kushina glared at him the most, saying, "You should know by now." As well as Garp. "On that day, we warned the both of you. If any of our family was threatened, we would appear. It seems none of you idiots took us seriously. Well, you're going to pay for it, as well as your pathetic world government." With his piercing azure, slitted eyes staring down at them, Naruto muttered, "That's right. And since this is a war, you'll be fighting us instead. So you better be ready." Some of them trembled, while Smoker took a few steps back. However, to their complete surprise, Naruto simply disappeared again. The area was only disturbed by a painful cry, and upon responding, they discovered Admiral Akainu bent over with Naruto's fist pierced his stomach. The two were close to the escaping pirates, specifically the two brothers and the escaping Jinbei. When Naruto grabbed Akainu by the face and slammed him into the ground, creating a crater, Sengoku could only grimace. "This idiot will be the first to die. The war has officially begun." Without waiting for Akainu's response, Naruto pulled him away from the dirt and then used his Busashoku haki to coat his fist, causing it to flare with an azure aura, before striking the admiral in the face. A muffled scream of pain and agony came from the muffled admiral, and the man's face just fell in on itself. Sakazuki, however, shot like a rocket from Naruto's fist and then bounded past the stunned Sengoku before slamming into the destroyed Marine headquarters and the kanji for justice, shattering everything to hell. In a quick reaction, Naruto simply reappeared next to Kushina, the woman who smiled at him, and he smiled back. Both Naruto and Kushina grabbed their cloaks before speaking, turning back to face the startled Marines. "Now, let's get started." When they removed their cloaks, they once more showed themselves to the outside world. And Mihawk simply grinned at what they saw, while Garp and Sengoku scowled. She wore a form-fitting crimson tank top with Kushina, revealing her mid-drift and developed bust. Skin-tight black pants that ended at her knees were worn underneath this. A golden sash, with a small end hanging from the left, wrapped around her waist, and crimson flames licked the bottoms of the trousers. Her two long red bangs, which were secured with purple hair clips, framed the sides of her face as her long maroon hair fell below her lower back and to her butt. She wore a pair of open-toed sandals that strangely resembled Luffy's own. However, there was a sword of katana on her left hip. To swordsmen of the highest caliber, it appeared normal at first. It was just majestic, but deadly nonetheless. It had a simple black sheath with a crimson outline, and a spiraling dragon, which was entirely golden, could be seen circling the sheath. The handle was blood-red crimson, and the guard itself was golden. A rather unusual skull and crossbones as the pommel. At last, a wedding ring was visible on her left hand's ring finger, symbolizing her unity with Naruto. Speaking of Naruto, did he fully reveal himself in his own clothes when his cloak came off? He was about 6 feet 2 inches and wore a basic black muscle shirt that revealed his hard 8-pack and torn chest like a second skin. He was dressed down in multi-pocketed black cargo pants. The bottom of his pants was tucked into a pair of black pirate boots that he wore on his feet. Now that his cloak was off, his long mane of golden black streaked hair, which covered the majority of his back, was fully visible. Lastly, he had a weapon in his sash, just like Kushina, but it was a saber, and it was bigger than most. The guard was pure gold. The handle was a vivid crimson, and the sheath was completely black with a golden outline. In order to demonstrate his unity with Kushina, he wore a log pose on his wrist and a ring on his left hand and ring finger. A necklace of some kind with a silver skull pendant that appeared to glow as the battle was about to begin was the last item around his neck. Naruto pointed at the adversaries as they slowly drew out their weapons before saying, "Now, your battle is with us." After that, the two charged at the Admiral's marine. With Trafalgar and Jinbei, did Jinbei give up Ace and Luffy when they arrived at the submarine, before they were taken to the medical bay for prompt recovery? Both Supernova and the former Shichibukai stood outside on the submarine's deck, observing the battle as it happened. Trafalgar and Jinbei were taken aback by what they witnessed, and Law was genuinely alarmed by how effortlessly the blonde man defeated an admiral, as if he had been doing it for years. However, even that was insufficient because they stumbled or fell to their knees when he released his haki. And the shockwave alone sent them rolling. They weren't even in its radius or even its target. The only thing they could do was watch as the two charged into battle with the Admiral and Marines, causing a huge clash that sent another shockwave into the swirling winds of each battle with the foot soldiers of the fodder Marines. W. Who are these people? Trafalgar muttered, his body flinching and trembling with every clash as his eyes watched the scene in front of him. Every time an attack was launched, the screams of the dying Marines echoed throughout the area as more were launched into the air by the enormous shockwaves. The fishman said, "I don't know, but it was a miracle they came. If not, we'd be in even more trouble." Thankfully Ace was saved with their interference. "I can only thank them immensely for this." Trafalgar looked down at the battle taking place in front of his eyes and simply nodded. What he was seeing now was nothing like the word power that he was familiar with. With every clash, the sky itself was tearing itself apart, and the ground itself was shaking and cracking. The pacifistas were completely destroyed as if they were just target dummies. Trafalgar's reality was about to collapse at the unbelievable sight in front of him, so it was truly mind-blowing. He wondered what the other supernovas would think of these individuals. Forget that. This would shake the entire pirate origin story. As he looked at the two fighting Uzumakis, Jinbei was lost in thought. He frowned at something Neptune and Odahime had told him and Tiger had said before their leave. If you two ever, never, come across two people with the middle initial D, keep these words in mind, Tiger and Jibe. And bear the marks of Tethys and Oceanus. Report back to us as soon as you can. You see, Jinbei.kun and Tiger.kun are very important to us and the entire aquatic race. They are very good friends of ours and our children. We kindly ask that you ask them to visit us if you ever get the chance. Remembering those words, Jinbei scowled as he stared at the battle in front of him, his gaze locked on the two Uzumakis. That is, until he had a flashback of something. The things that Garp said when he and Ace were in the Impel Down. The two rulers of the ocean will reappear when their family is in danger. The rulers of the sea will only rise again when they are called upon. The now wide-eyed Jinbei stammered, "By Neptune. It can't be." The fishman staggered back, trembling even more, and had to hold onto the railing for balance as the shock overcame him. Trafalgar gave him a perplexed look, but if he had known the realization Jinbei had just made, he too would have been taken aback. What will happen now, considering that Ace and Luffy are connected to those two by Neptune's trident? If only he had known that the great wave of change was approaching and would engulf everyone in its path before dragging them into the next era. Alongside Helmeppo and Kobe, the terrified Kobe exclaimed, "W. What on earth is this?" He and Helmeppo were hiding among the corpses of their erstwhile allies. They were aware that the shockwaves from the battles would be enough to kill them in this one. Regardless of the training they received, they were never prepared for this and never will be. Observing two individuals alone, fight against the most powerful members of the world government. What are these people? Are they even human? I know, and that golden-haired guy. H. He threw Admiral Akainu around like I was nothing. Helmeppo, who was equally horrified, muttered. As more marine bodies flew past them, some dead, some dismembered, and some completely torn to pieces, Kobe continued to observe the battle. These people are monsters, not human. If only he understood the truth of that statement. With Tashigi and Smoker as the Smoker clutched his sea. Stone made Jute in the rear line of the battle with the other vice admirals, his eyes glared at the two, giving him a sense of fear he had never wanted to experience again. What those two had done that day was still fresh in his mind. Smoker avoided an approaching marine soldier who was being pelted by the ensuing backlashing winds by leaning to the left. Did Smokers curse when they saw the closing in Uzumakis? Gosh, they haven't gotten any weaker since that day. Who are they and how horrible are they? His second.in command, a female swordswoman, looked at him bewildered as he said that. The woman struggled to keep from collapsing under the weight of the hockey's release. She couldn't help but be in awe of the two Uzumakis' swordplay, though, as they were raised from the ground and launched into the tumultuous winds with only a swing. All she could say was that those who attempted to repel them were destroyed. Swords, katanas, and even the Akuma no Mi. Devil fruit users they possessed were insignificant in comparison to them. However, did she become even more intrigued by Smoker's words than she already was? Captain, what do you mean? What are the past actions of these two? Smoker merely gave her a quick glance before turning back to face the conflict. The young swordswoman's eyes widened as he walked forward, brandishing his jute, and said, "These people, Toshigi, are the ones that committed the massacre of the Tenryubito and are the ones responsible for taking Gold D. Rogers' body from the government's hands on the day of his own execution." Every member of the Marines was aware of the massacre at the World Nobles, which rocked the world when two unidentified assassins showed up on the day of the Marijoy attack. Only those in higher positions knew about those two assassins at the time. However, more than 100 world nobles were brutally murdered and dismembered on that day. It was the bloodiest day in the history of the world government, with the slaves they imprisoned spitting on their dead bodies as they fled and the blood of the nobles spilled on the streets of their own city. However, the one in which Roger's body was removed perplexed her. And why did that make Captain's eyes go frightened? With Kushina and Naruto used his saber to block another Marine attack, causing the Marines to blow away from him. Before delivering a swift jab to the Marine's stomach, he ducked under another blow, causing his stomach to be crushed and his spine to break. He spun around and slammed his foot into the ground again, causing another upheaval to appear, this time using only pure seawater. Like a gigantic pillar, it rose straight up into the air like a geyser, carrying innumerable Marines with it. The ice block. Partisan, Isu Kai. Ryo Irahoko. A voice that Naruto was familiar with yelled as countless spears of ice materialized and shot in his direction. That is, until he grinned at the sound of another voice. Yasukani no Magatama, or the jewel with the 8-shaku curve. A soprano. Like voice yelled, as innumerable beams of light appeared between the incoming ice spears. When Naruto saw the impending attacks, he merely grinned before yanking his saber outward and slamming his other hand to the ground before yelling. Busashoku. Bodiyama, color of the armaments. Body armor. His body was engulfed in a blazing aura of gold just prior to the attacks. Boom. Naruto remarked, "Nice try, you two, but you'll need to do better than that." The ground surrounding him was a massive crater the size of which could have destroyed a small battleship. However, he had no visible wounds, and when Naruto looked up at his two assailants, he saw Admiral Kizaru and Aokiji standing in front of him. The latter had a serious expression on his face, while the former was as usual relaxed, but his orange-tinted glasses concealed a serious glint. "It appears that you are still as monstrous as ever, Uzumaki." Aokiji spoke, with sheets of ice and frost partially but not entirely encircling his body. The air was freezing, and the ground itself froze around him. Kizaru simply stepped forward before he spoke. The light man said, "It's been a long time." Bloody Maelstrom, in his typical tone. The name Naruto was given only made him smirk. He was not even an inch away from the attack when his hand shot up to stop Kizaru's kick, but the area behind him was completely destroyed by the shockwave that followed. "Borsellino, you're still the type to dive right in? Fool." And before the Admiral could respond, Naruto leapt into the air and kicked the man in the chest with a roundhouse hockey, sending him flying straight into a couple of Marineford buildings. Naruto swung his saber toward the spot where Borsellino struck after slamming into them and gathering his hockey into it to cause it to flare up into a golden aura. Kantengu Tasuki. Busashoku. Kenjutsu. Armaments color. Sword style. Cutting moon. And the golden aura from his saber just solidified with such speed and accuracy that a giant arc of golden hockey shot off from him with his end swing. It was so high that it split the sky itself, tearing apart the clouds and tearing up the ground like butter. Blood and gore were splattered on the ground, cutting Marines in the attack's path clean. In addition to cursing his failure to intervene in time, Aokiji couldn't help but stare in mild awe at the enormous hockey attack. All those years ago, it still made him think about how dangerous this man was and what he could do if he was serious. Observers of the battle between the three could only stare in disbelief as one man held back the two admirals. Apart from Sengoku and the Gorosei themselves, they were the strongest. Given that it was slicing the very heavens, Toshigi and Mihawk were astounded to see the enormous sword slash on its way to the admiral. It was obviously too difficult to ignore. The only indication that Borsellino was surprised when he exploded out of the building was when his eyes widened behind his glasses. Boom. The battlefield was rocked by another titanic explosion, which lighted up the sky and vaporized everything in its path. The ocean and clouds separated from the assault. The sphere of chaos pulled the marine foot soldiers up, vaporizing them completely, leaving them with no choice but to flee in fear. Tashigi exclaimed, "Oh my, Kami," as she stared at the flaming ball of devastation, her eyes full of surprise and wonder. The sight of such an attack made her hands shake with excitement and fear. When Smoker saw this, he could only shake his head at the weapons and tactics his subordinates chose. Aokiji kicked Naruto, causing the ground in front of him to crater as he abruptly ducked under it. He quickly reacted by doing a handstand and then kicking the man in the chin. However, the admiral acted and then jabbed at Naruto, but Naruto's hand caught it. Before kicking Aokiji several times like a pinwheel, Naruto spun and spread his legs wide. Prior to the man skidding back a few feet, he leapt to his feet and kicked him in the abdomen, causing him to cough up blood. The admiral shouted as he retracted his hands, causing them to become covered in ice. Partisan Ryo Irihoko. This time, in contrast to his previous ice attack, the spears were much more sophisticated and numerous. He yelled. He threw out his arms, shooting them in the direction of Naruto, who had drawn his saber earlier. Only a skilled swordsman could parry each spear, causing it to pierce the ground around him. When he looked up after noticing that they were all gone, he saw Aokiji holding more ice in his arms. Isukai, Bokiji Kuchibashi, Ice Block, Pheasant Beak, and Ace launched the same attack, but it was much larger than before. Naruto simply grabbed his saber in his left hand as he saw it approaching and then clenched his right fist, setting it on fire with his fiery golden haki. Try something different with Busashoku. Taijutsu. Hasai.ken, Color of the Armaments. Crushing Fist. Hand.to. Hand, and with a swing, Naruto's fiery fist struck the enormous ice bird. There was a pause, and then the bird just cracked before shattering as a golden beam of haki blasted through the ice, melting it while still shooting a hole through the clouds. Aokiji grimaced in his mind as he examined his slightly burned left arm, thinking, damn, still as powerful as ever. He managed to escape before the full force of the attack could reach him, but it still injured his left arm. The admiral landed back on the ground, frowning slightly as he looked down at the man. Naruto merely smirked at him before turning his gaze to the right. You're still as strong as ever. I see old age still hasn't caught up to you, he said. At that moment, Kizaru appeared next to Aokiji. He wasn't dead as some marines thought, but he wasn't unharmed either. His admiral's mantle was gone, and his suit was severely burned. He had a huge cut on his chest that was bleeding out. Moosh moosh. The admiral said, this guy is still monstrously powerful as ever. Aokiji simply nodded in agreement with his fellow admiral, while Naruto simply shrugged. When the two finally turned their attention to Naruto, who was standing there unharmed, Aokiji finally spoke up. Isu Saberu, Ice Saber, and then a gigantic sword made of ragged ice materialized in Aokiji's hands, which was as tall as he was. Kizaru then separated his hands after slamming them together. Sword of the Gathering Clouds of Heaven, Ama no Murakumo. Then, in Kizaru's hands, a sword of pure light materialized, just like Aokiji did. It was as tall as he was, and he and his fellow admiral brandished it while staring down their adversary. The ground cracked and cratered around Naruto as his haki gradually encircled his body in a fiery blazing golden aura. Naruto shook his head as he watched the two form their own weapons before pointing his saber toward them. He spoke while glaring at the two admirals. All right, kids, come on over, and when the three charged at one another, did they all swing in unison? Boom. Alongside Kushina, another explosion occurred on the opposite side of the battlefield during the conflict between Naruto and the two admirals. When Kushina was slicing down another group of marines, this one made her look in its direction, until she sensed someone behind her. She was slightly surprised to see Dracula Mihawk himself clutching his Kakuto Yuru, black sword, knight, as she glanced over her shoulder. As he pulled out her katana, which gleamed in the smoke and winds of battle, Kushina grinned at the excited expression in Mihawk's eyes, which contrasted with his typically emotionless expression. Well, am I? Chan, it looks like you've changed since I last saw you, she said, causing the swordsman to wince at the name. He spoke, brandishing his enormous sword. He said, Kushina, you better get ready to fight because I'm coming. Then, without warning, Mihawk vanished, only to reappear in front of Kushina in the middle of his swing. Clang. The only warning Mihawk received before Kushina kicked him in the stomach and then slashed down at him was, sorry, am I? Chan, but you should know better than to go before a woman. Especially me. Mihawk saw this coming and promptly deflected the attack, but this time the ensuing collision shattered the ground beneath him. He looked up and saw Kushina's amused eyes. This infuriated him, so he kicked off the ground before he could speak. Blackbeard single flash. Kakuto Issen. As he said that, a green compressed air arc came toward Kushina while he swung and glared at him with his hawk eyes. When Kushina saw this, she swiftly raised her katana and grinned before opening her eyes again and speaking. Don't think I'm a weakling, am I? Chan. Itoryu. Dorigankuro. Ryu no Kasai Suipu. One sword style. Dragon claw style. Dragon fire swipe, and, just before Mihawk's eyes, Kushina's katana was engulfed in flames before she swung down, sending a giant arc of flames toward his own attack. To his surprise, however, the giant arc split apart and formed into 3 fiery dragon talons, the first of which sliced through his own Kakuto Issen. When Mihawk noticed the other 2 approaching, he simply cut them both in half, causing them to split apart, before striking the nearby marines and setting them on fire. He turned around and ignored their cries of agony, simply staring at Kushina, who returned the look. Let's see who's the best, sensei. This is the time to finally determine who is a better swordsman. When he said that, Kushina simply grinned and shook her head. Sorry am Chan, but this is a battle. I'm gonna be taking, she said, gripping her katana, which was once again engulfed in crimson flames, before her eyes simply turned to pure flames and her crimson maroon hair billowed in the raging winds, causing them to strangely appear as though her hair was also made of pure flames. Very seriously. You better be ready, my old student, she said, vanishing just in front of Mihawk's eyes. Mihawk raised his sword after cursing. Clang. There was another clatter of steel on steel, but this time the entire area erupted in shockwaves. The clashing swordsman and sword woman were inside the spiraling whirlwind of fire and stone that blew outward, clashing several times at speeds that only one other person could possibly decipher. The surrounding ground was either sliced by their attacks or simply broke under the strain of every fight. Mihawk flipped into the air to block another attack before saying, Kakuto Arahoshi, Blackbeard heavy star. He came down with his blade aimed directly at Kushina while standing on his sword. This caused the ground to split apart as the sword struck it, but the woman saw it coming and rolled back just in time. Kushina took this chance and swung forward with her fire. Engulfed katana, saying, Itoryu. Dorigankuro. Ryu Spiral no Kuro. Single sword style. Dragon claw style. Dragon spiral claw. Suddenly, 3 spiraling dragon claws emerged from her swing, forming a fire spiral that was aimed at Mihawk. When the man saw this, he swiftly drew his sword and swung it downward, colliding with the claws. Small shockwaves tore through the attacks, causing the ground to crater with each one, until at last. Boom! The area was torn apart by an explosion, and the nearby foot soldier marines were incinerated when a massive flaming sphere erupted again. Its width increased along with it, until it finally slowed down before exploding in a raging hurricane as well. Both Kushina and Mihawk were in the center of the explosion area, melting the ground as it did in cooling lava. Kushina was unharmed and normal as usual, but Mihawk was completely different from her. His clothing was nearly burned, but he was still wearing his plain dark cloak and his wide black feathered hat, which were now completely gone. His body was also slightly burned, though not severely. His sword sustained the most damage, chipping in a few places. Mihawk's eyes merely widened slightly in rage at this realization. Damn it. Stop using these parlor tricks and use your true power, sensei. He yelled at his former sensei, and Kushina simply sighed when he heard it. The hockey induced flames she had created vanished in an instant, and in their place were Kushina's eyes, which had changed from being pure violet flaming orbs to being as sharp as the sharpest sword capable of piercing the very fabric of reality itself. She spoke in a tone that was only used by people of the highest order of skill and killing, while holding her now normal katana. You have no power over me, child. You are still the impatient brat you were in those days. It's time for me to discipline you. And before Mihawk could say anything at all, before a slash with blood oozing from it appeared over his left shoulder blade, there was a flash of silver. Ah! He grunted, but before he could see another flash out of the corner of his eye, he took action. This time, he grasped his sword and swung it in the direction of the flash. Blackbeard first day. Kakuto Saku. With it, he swiftly swung down, ready to clash again. They did, but this time Kushina's violet eyes were glaring at Mihawk, and he remembered that they were now deadly and sharp. This time, he pulled back before swinging again. Clang. Marines near the clash were reduced to ribbons as a result of the collision, which caused a hurricane of wind and debris to appear once more. This time, the ground itself was cratered with tiny cuts. As the organs fell to the ground, the blood swept into the air, turning the hurricane crimson red. Kushina vanished and reappeared a few feet ahead of Mihawk. This time, she concealed her katana in its sheath, but Mihawk's eyes widened in surprise as he watched it slowly be drawn. It only got worse when Kushina spoke in a tone that made him shudder and gave him a smirk that was both cold and deadly. Shan, you had better act quickly or you'll perish in this next attack. Shit. He swore before he grabbed his Yuru, pulled it back, and then swung it again as quickly and forcefully as he could manage, he said. The world's strongest slash, Sekaiichi no Zangeki. After saying that, he swung in Kushina's direction, sending a huge arc of compressed air traveling at high speed. They both ignored those who stood in the way of the attack, but the woman simply grinned as she saw it coming her way. The slash of compressed air cut cleanly through both buildings and marines. When Kushina saw it coming, she grinned and swiftly drew her katana. Then, in a flash, she said, Busashoku. Shapu. Sekaiichi Nashi Zangeki. Color of the armaments. Sharpen. The strongest slash of the world. And the same arc of compressed air at high speed appeared, only this time it was larger. Much larger. Similar to her husband's attack, which sliced through the upper portion of the sky and into the ground, this one was tearing through the earth and the water beneath the island itself. The island portion that was cut was gradually tilting deeper into the ocean as it drew closer to Mihawk's own slash. This portion primarily consisted of some of Marineford's populated housings. But after the two attacks collided, it was anticipated that there would be another explosion, but surprisingly, Mihawk's attack was cut clean and through like butter, separating parts of Marineford's base in two. When Mihawk saw Kushina's attack coming his way, he only had time to raise his Yuru in an attempt to deflect it. Mihawk held his Yuru firmly in front of him once it was within range, and he gritted his teeth and glared at the attack as soon as he felt the slash hitting him. He continued to skid back and forth without stopping, gaining momentum as he went. He stomped his foot into the ground, then held his ground and stopped himself entirely. The attack intensified as it was thwarted, but Mihawk closed his eyes as it grew more powerful before heaving with all of his strength to repel it. That was what caused Kushina's blow to fly high into the air, severing the clouds entirely before they vanished, but it also caused Mihawk to fall to his knees. Despite being a few feet away, his Kakuto Yuru, which he was holding tightly, was missing half of its blade. He slowly turned to see Kushina staring at him and his broken sword before shaking her head when he sensed someone in front of him. She carefully put her katana back in its sheath before picking up the sliced end of his Yuru and setting it next to Mihawk. She smirked as she said, "You did well, Mihawk. Countering my second strongest attack is no small feat, I give you that. That's why. If you help me in Naru.koi, I shall restore the Kakuto Yuru. After all, I made it." Mihawk gazed at her for a moment before turning to face his broken blade, the only one he had. He could only smirk as he looked at his former sensei, saying, "I guess I have no other option." To which Kushina simply smiled, resembling Monkey D. Luffy. "You're absolutely correct, TT Ebane." With that, she vanished again, and Mihawk, despite his defeat, chuckled as he grasped the other end of his blade. Did Mihawk mention a Marimo-haired swordsman? "It looks like I have a lot more to learn, Renoa Zoro, so it looks like you're not the only one who needs training." Alongside Naruto and two others were lying face down on the ground in one of the innumerable craters scattered across the battlefield. He was cleaning off the last of the blood from his saber and slowly sheathing it, but he was unharmed. Although his clothes were unharmed, his face and his clothes both bore the blood of his enemies. There were no tears or anything, but his skin and clothes were covered in the blood of his two adversaries. He sighed in boredom as he looked down at his vanquished adversaries. In contrast to him, Aokiji and Borsellino were literally just bloody smears on the ground. Both their admiral mantles and portions of their upper and lower garments were gone. His saber's cuts and gashes were visible on their arms, legs, and chests. Both Aokiji's headpiece and Borsellino's long sunglasses were broken. They were unconscious as they lay on the ground, blood accumulating, because their bodies were not in harmony with the cuts and slashes, and their bones were broken and shattered. Broken arms and legs, broken collarbones, fractured ribs. Naruto looked up at Sengoku and Garp, where Whitebeard was, after he saw the two down and his wife finished with Mihawk. He then slowly looked up at the Marineford base, analyzing it for a few minutes before narrowing his eyes. "It appears that we have some guests." He then vanished, moving in the direction of Whitebeard. With Garp and Sengoku and Garp attempted to step in during the battles between Naruto and Kushina, but Whitebeard prevented them from doing so at all. Even though he was going to die, he knew that no matter how hard the two tried to fight, it wouldn't change the outcome. This war was ended by those two, giving the pirates worldwide a victory. The badly injured Whitebeard stood before Sengoku and Garp, smiling at them. At first, he believed that Ace's death would have ended the war, but then those two showed up, and their irritated looks only made it more alluring to him. There was only one way they could have looked like that, and he thanked Shanks deeply inside. You two are in trouble now. Even if I die, it won't stop those two from coming at you and with the full force of the entire ocean upon you and the whole world government, he said, ignoring the blood pooling from him, as he looked at the two and let out a loud laugh. If it weren't absolutely true, Sengoku, the always arrogant marine, would have snarled at him. He and the entire Gorosei were terrified of those two, and their fear was only heightened by their awakening. Yet he and Garp stood before Whitebeard, Garp's unbridled strength and him in his golden Buddha form. As both Naruto and Kushina appeared at Whitebeard's side, the giant pirate grinned even more. That's right, after all Garp here is taking duty over his own family. And Sengoku here is overlooking the sins of their very nobles they protect. Said a voice that caused both Marines' eyes to widen in shock. Garp said, Why? Why? You? As he gazed at the two individuals he wished to never see, not out of resentment or rage, but rather because of his own transgressions against them and the betrayal he had committed. While Kushina glared at him with enough haughty and murderous intent to make him flinch and take a step back, Naruto simply gave him a cold look before turning his attention to Sengoku. Uzumaki D.I. never would have guessed that Naruto and Uzumaki D. Kushina were still alive. Sengoku muttered as he looked down at the two individuals who made even the renowned Pirate King Gold D. Roger seem insignificant in terms of power. Seems like I should have taken your words all those years ago more seriously. My own pride blinded me. But look at what it comes to. You, stupid brat, for not only trying to kill our own family, we have come to beat the words and sense into your heads, Naruto said, glaring at the man. Naruto glared at Sengoku's enraged eyes and said, Your admirals aren't going to be able to do anything as well as your other Shichibukai. You've lost either way, Sengoku. That might be the case, but Garp and I are still here, he yelled before lowering his palm and sending out a golden shockwave, but before it could reach them, Naruto used his own haki to shoot out his own palm, which was blazing, stopping the attack and rendering it null and void. Unfortunately, we've got other matters to attend to, so. Naruto then appeared in front of Sengoku and punched him in the stomach with all of his raw strength, leaving Sengoku stunned and unable to move. He didn't go flying because he had defended his position, but the Marineford base wasn't as protected because it was struck by a shockwave once more. Only Naruto's unadulterated strength caused it to shatter and fall apart. He spun around in midair, blocking a Garp punch with his knee as the shockwaves from the blow flowed behind him, sensing that Garp was coming from his right. Glaring down at the solemn Garp, he grabbed his face and kneed him in the face, causing the man to groan in agony before spinning him around and hurling him to the ground. The impact caused the ground to crater beneath him, causing the man to grunt in agony once more. When he attempted to move, a katana was aimed at his neck. Did he look up to see Kushina poised to kill him right then and there? He couldn't move, and even if he tried, he would be on a one-way journey to his deathbed because her foot was firmly planted on his chest. She spat out the word, traitor, like poison and said, You stay right where you are. Traitor. When Garp realized it was pointless and heard Kushina's words, he just lay there motionless, letting the tears he had suppressed fall. He turned to face Sengoku with Naruto, who was gasping for air and had blood dripping from his mouth. Although his fist impression was still in his stomach, Naruto glared at the Marineford base instead of Sengoku after feeling that again. All right, you rats, I'll flush you out if you continue to hide, and Naruto emerged in front of the Marineford base with his golden haki blazing and his fist clenched before anyone could stop him. Naruto spoke as he swung his arm. Busashoku. Kyoka. Jishin.ken. Armaments color. Earthquake fist strengthening, as a real man. Mid-earthquake shook around the building. Naruto punched it just before Whitebeard's shock, causing it to tremble and shake. That was all that was required before, right in front of everyone's eyes, and it only took a minute. Did Marineford simply collapse? The outer walls cracked and fell as it did, and the earthquake inside literally tore it apart before it fell in on itself. Naruto and Kushina drew back their fists and glared up at the figures visible from inside the collapsing Marine headquarters, but the person in the center of them all was the one they truly cared about. Marshal D. Teach, also known as Blackbeard, was standing atop the collapsing structure. At the moment, the man was wearing a shocked expression, particularly when he noticed the two pairs of glaring violet and azure slitted orbs staring down at him. Teach! Whitebeard yelled, glaring at the man who had initially gotten Ace into all of this trouble in addition to starting a mutiny on his ship. Despite Naruto and Kushina, Garp and Sengoku gazed up angrily at the man who had started it all. Kushina glared at Blackbeard and his crew and muttered, So he's the one that Shanks told us about. When Naruto released his haki, his entire body erupted in golden haki that swept through the sky and engulfed Marineford and its island in a golden glow visible from all sides of the Grand Line. It resembled the vengeful flames of God's torch. Thus, this brat is the one who not only placed my grandchildren in such a precarious situation, but he also left me and Kushina's second son scarred. You won't make it out of here alive. On its own, Naruto's angry words sent a shockwave through the island. His hair simply billowed in the self. Made winds of power as the haki's golden aura erupted like a volcano. With his fists clenched, Naruto unleashed a glare that sent the terrified Blackbeard into genuine, fearful hysterics, not the ones he usually fakes. He will pay with his blood because he infuriated his mother and father. The vicinity of Marineford did Shanks frown among the entire crew when they saw the golden aura of light emanate from Marineford on the pirate ship Red Force. He and his team were prepared to support Whitebeard and the people he had summoned. He worried for the two even though he knew they wouldn't need it. However, he scowled even more when he saw the island's golden aura flare up, lighting up the sky itself as viewed from all over the Grand Line and the New World. Father is furious.
That's it for today. I hope you guys enjoyed this great story. See you in the next one.